We are recording. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this week before we do anything else. So normally in the curriculum, events is something we cover off in one lecture. And I introduce you to events. I have a second lecture that I find valuable. This lecture is going to get really into the how to of events, how to add an event listener to something, how to make events happen, what the mechanics are of an event, what makes events tick. That's all well and good. But my next lecture after this is going to be much more about design patterns around events, how to code your events out so that you don't get errors. Common patterns including event delegation and event bubbling, where event bubbling is something I made up to describe an alternative to event delegation, because I am not sure if it has a name for the pattern yet. So today what I'm really going to be showing you is how events work, how we build it out. And on Thursday, I'm going to be kind of describing different approaches you can make to have the least error prone events possible. And that's going to be the focus for this week. It's unfortunately, at least this lecture is not going to rely on the CATS 2019 website. I mentioned before we started recording, but I want to just make sure everyone who's watching at home isn't disappointed when we start doing something else instead. We will get back to CATS though. So if that's what you're here for, well, I'll be teaching you events instead. I hope you still stay, but if you're looking to see Macavity during this lecture, you're in for a little bit of disappointment. Cool. Everyone following that? Awesome. Do we have any questions before we dive in? And also, can I just get a general how everyone's doing? Are you thumbs up if you're feeling I'm caught up with the labs, I think I know what's going on still. Thumbs sideways if you're not like that. Thumbs down if you're this is terrible. Cool. And feel free to just dump your takes in chat too. Cool. That's fair. And the we're going to be doing a lot more of creating elements. That's not going to go away. Functions are going to be weird forever, but that's just JavaScript. But yeah, cool. I'm glad to hear it. I will try to keep doing check-ins like that. If you see me not doing that for a while, let me know. A couple of other logistical updates. Omar bugged me about this in phase 1. I kind of did it and then didn't. And now I just asked another teacher what they do for their water cooler, and they told me 30 seconds. But we have a water cooler now, so if you ever want to drop into a Zoom with somebody else, it's pinned to the Slack channel. I need to remember to put it on Learn on Canvas. But feel free to drop in there. If you need something more crazy, if you hey, I want my own personal one, something like that, I can probably make that work too. I'm not gonna fall for that, Omar. But cool. But so at this point, I think in terms of logistical stuff, that covers off all the stuff on my end. This week is all about events. Next week is going to be all about fetch. And then after that, I'm going to rearrange the curriculum in some sort of way that I still haven't decided yet, because I honestly haven't looked at what the weird labs are and start to slice stuff up. But that's what we're going for. So events, they're awesome. They're the reason why JavaScript in the browser is cool, why it was built. We built JavaScript to make web pages interactive, and interactivity basically always involves waiting for the user to do something and then doing something in response. And that's really what events are, right? Event listeners are. It's being hey, wait for the user to do something and then trigger this. And that's what we're going to be covering off on for the next week. Cool. So first off, to get started with a couple of different kinds of events, I am going to pull this up. This is Graham's little bot. The actual code is in jQuery for some reason, because I think he was having fun with it. He's an old lecturer from the in-person program, still has now since gone to separate ways, but will still show up basically any bar. But what he built is he built a little tool to show some of the most common events that you'll be using here. Now, this is by no means a list of every event that you have access to in JavaScript. The important thing to note is that you basically have an event for everything in JavaScript if you decide to look for it. There's also third-party APIs that give you more access. I'm going to give you a more complete list in a second. It will still be incomplete. Common ones, click. When I click this, it will change color. All of these will change color when I trigger the event in some way. When you click on something, it will change color. One thing to note, when I hold down the mouse, it doesn't change until I release it. Mouse over, when I get into a box, that's when it triggers. Mouse out is the exact opposite when my mouse leaves. Everyone can see my mouse, right? Cool. Great. We see this. Mouse down is for when you start clicking. So I'm holding down my mouse now. I'm going to let go and nothing happens. So starting, letting go, right? Mouse up, the exact opposite. Click, nothing's happening. When I let go, something else happens. This becomes important when you start building games, where you're like, hey, I want something to happen when they start pressing the button. I want something to happen when they stop pressing the button. I want it to trigger when this happens. Mouse move is for when you want to do sandstorm. Just right here. Whenever my mouse is moving, it's going to be changing color. These submit events, I don't remember why there are two of them, but submit events are interesting. I'm going to be talking a lot about them. They are events that fire on the form, which I will eventually get to. But what this means, you can submit a form by either hitting the submit button, right? Or by hitting enter in any of the fields. That's the default action of a submit event. I'm going to explain a lot more what default actions mean, or default behaviors. This other submit event, I'm going to ignore. Key down, when you start pressing a button, and you can keep holding it down to keep firing it, right? We've got key up, which I'm holding this button down. It's not doing anything, but when I let go, it pops up. This is not part of JavaScript. This is part of Mac. Key press. It tries to be like the click of key down, key up. So when I first press down the button, it works, right? But unlike key down, it's not going to keep firing if I hold it down. Change is something that is helpful, especially when you get to React or when you want to track something. This is going to change when I select something different, right? When you type in somewhere, hello, it doesn't change until you deselect it. Cool. Focus, when I click into something, it focuses it. Cool. And blur is the opposite when I click out of something. All of these end up being pretty helpful. Like there are so many times when you're like, hey, when a user exits this input of a form, I want to run my bootleg validations, check each one of these inputs for errors, and then pop them up next to them. That's something that I recently had to do for some sort of coding exercise I was doing. To like build a calculator, but it was a feature that was helpful. That was like, blur was literally an event listener I wanted to use. Do you have any questions? Like this is just meant to be exposure to like, really when you get to JavaScript, right? Like your job is going to be, hey, I want to do something when the user does X, and then Google it. That's part of your gig here. All event listeners kind of work the same way. To an extent. There are a few very notable things I want to talk about later. But basically, you can go ahead and go on to some documentation, dig up what the event is, and then do something to handle it. Do you have any questions before I move on here? How are we feeling? Cool. I'm going to show you a little bit about like how these events get incorporate in a second. It might be smart to do that beforehand. If I want to, right? Yeah, let's go ahead and I'm just gonna pull this up in the console, right? Now I'm going to talk about this in a second. We're about done with the events. Here's a more of a robust list of events. So you can go ahead and see. Sorry, this is. Oh, they used to have a chart here. Where am I losing this? These are all events. They're not all of the events you can find in JavaScript. See, event listing? Nope. But the point is, you have an immense amount at your disposal, right? If I wanted to, let's see if I can find this here. I'll come back to this in a no, let's do it now. Menu. There we go. Like if I wanted to check to see if someone's right-clicking something, context menu exists. I can check to see when someone's mouse moves. I can do whatever I want. Basically, if you want to observe and record your users and find out everything about how they behave on a page, you can do that with JavaScript. There's nothing stopping you except your own time for coding it. I'm sure there's probably some APIs to even like, now that we've got phones, to be like, hey, are your eyes moving? Like that, I haven't dug that up yet, but just know there's things here for basically everything. Cool. I'm going to show you how to incorporate basically all of them over the course of this lecture. Great. How are we feeling? Cool.
Hey, Nikki.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, how do you incorporate the objects themselves when you're referencing add event listener to document, for instance? But then you have to focus in on a method and an object, right? But where are you getting the object from the HTML page?
So are you saying like
always?
If I want to
are you
add
always
like, yeah. I'm going to show you the 3 steps in a second, right? But the 3 steps to build an event listener, right? Are to find an element on the page, add an event listener to that element, and then specify in the arguments for that event listener what kind of event you're listening for and what the callback function is. I'm going to work through that in a lot of detail in a second. But eventually, yes, you do need to choose what on the page gets the event listener. Make sense?
Copy. Thanks.
Cool. So right here, let's start with the basic event listener, right? If I wanted to make it so that anytime I clicked on this page, it would console log hello. Does anyone think they can make that happen? Sometimes I wonder if I ask challenging questions in order to actually get a response from the students, or if I just needed a break to drink some water. On click event listener. Yeah. We've got document.add event listener is a very common thing to do, right? Document is a little broad. We're going to eventually be changing this, right? But I want to show you the basic function structure, right? Click is the event. And then I'm going to go ahead and before we, yeah, I'm going to create an anonymous function right here that goes ahead. Cool. Let's actually, I might like pull this into our actual code. Boop. First, I'm going to console log hello world so that we know that our code is loading. Great. Cool. We get the hello world. Great. I can click on this. I get hello now wherever I click in my console. Cool. Show you the code here. I did this. Can anyone explain to me what I did? Like, what's this little thing? Anyone remember from last week?
It's an anonymous function.
Yeah. I mentioned these are going to be super helpful. What would happen if I just did this? Let's try it out. I'm gonna refresh the page. What do we notice immediately?
Oh, it just console logs it out. It doesn't go with the event. It's not part of the function.
Yeah. What happened? Naomi, go for it. Or ask a question. It's not asynchronicity. It's a good guess. Naomi, you got your hands raised?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I just have a question. So what you did was, okay, can you go back to the browser? If I'm understanding correctly, you pretty much found like the ID of the emojis, right? Which was, I guess.
I didn't have to. I just put on document right now.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay.
Eventually,
get-
we will get to how to
Okay.
select an emoji and give them behaviors. That's going to probably be something we touch on today and then really get into on Thursday, like the correct way to do it so you don't get errors. But yeah,
Okay. Oops.
does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes. I just wanted to know, like, what did you do?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
like, okay.
I'm going to break this down in a second. We're going to get like really in depth on what we're supposed to be doing here. Cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Omar, you're getting on this, right? I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to say const test equals console.log hello world. What happened here? Could you explain to me why we saw hello world and then we got undefined? And then whenever we called test, we get undefined. You understood the first half of Thursday's lecture. And if you didn't, this is why we're reviewing it. So what's happening here? Remember when I said there's a difference between whoops. There we go. Between invoking a function with parentheses and just passing the definition of a function, right? We need to pass in a function definition or a function expression is what we call it in JavaScript, or a callback function, which is when we just pass in a function as an argument. When you hear callback function, think, oh, they want a function to be passed in as an argument to another function. When we pass in the definition of a function, right, the expression of a function to run later, that means the event listener can use it. When we just invoke it straight up, when we say like something like console log hello world, what's going to happen is it's going to read this left to right. It's going to say, hey, we have this function add event listener. Cool, it takes in 2 arguments. The first one's click. The second one's, oh, there's a function here. Better run it. It's going to run hello, or it's going to run the console log for hello. Console log's return is always undefined. So you end up running this immediately when the page loads, and then returning undefined right here. The way we get around this is we turn this into a function expression by making an anonymous function. Go ahead and say, hey, we're defining a function right here in place. You just use it and have some fun. And now it's back to behaving. How are we all feeling about that? The difference between a function expression, we're passing the definition of a function, and just writing this here, which will make it execute in place and then return its return statement. How are we feeling? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. Cool. Yeah, we're going to keep getting on this for a long time, right? Another way that you're going to see me write this a lot is, so we've got this, right? Console log hello. Once again, we'll spit out hello, but we'll return undefined. Hello goes into the console. The return statement is undefined. So let's actually go ahead and we'll say function, say hello, and return 2. Go ahead and define this for us, okay? Return 2. I'm going to run this. And you'll notice it prints out to the console, hello, but it returns true too. So if I go ahead and I say hello and return 2 plus 2, what happens?
It'll add them together, 2 plus 2.
Yeah, it's going to say hello first, and then it's going to return 4. Because what it's doing right here is in place, it's console logging 2, or it's console logging hello, returning 2, then it's going 2 plus 2 equals 4. So we get this console log, hello, then we get 4 back. How are we feeling? Naomi, what's up? Cool. So right here, if I wanted to go ahead and pass this into a event listener, we're actually going to see something weird happen. You get a lot. Right, I already made this. Right. Let's go ahead. Function, say hello and return 2, say hello and return 2. We are now console logging it out. Fascinating. I don't know why it's doubling down here. Oh, right, because I also have this code in the console, which I have not unsaved. But basically, the long story short here, we need to pass in an expression here. A very common error that you're going to get for the first 2 weeks is passing in the invocation of your function and then therefore passing in its return statement. Another very common way you're going to see me write this is something like this. This is called an arrow function. I'm intentionally holding off on teaching you it. It's ES6 syntax. it's great. It's a great way to do an event, to like pass an anonymous function for events. It has a little bit of unusual behaviors. I don't think anything that'll trip you up right now. But when I like teach it thoroughly, I'm going to be teaching it like to discuss like what it does slightly differently. But for now, if you feel comfortable with it, you can go ahead and start just incorporating this instead of doing like this bad boy. And if you ever need to pass in multiple arguments, you can go ahead and instead say like arguments. Right here. Or if you need multiple arguments, you write it like this. This is just another way of writing functions. It's really helpful for writing event listeners for reasons that I will explain in like 3 weeks. But this is just another way to kind of write an anonymous function in place. All right. I'm going to go back to event listers now. We can stop getting real fancy with the spices, right? The other thing we can also do right here. If I want to use this function, if I want to pass in this function, do I write hello with or without the parentheses here?
With the parentheses.
So now we get hello initially, and then it doesn't work, right? We're noticing this doesn't have a return statement. So we know that whatever's going to go in here is going to be undefined when we write these parentheses down. We're saying run this function and then put its return statement here whenever you see parentheses. Cool. So if I instead say, hey, just hold on to this, it'll wait to run it until after we've done the click. It invokes the callback function when the event listener is triggered. How are we feeling? Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to double check that we've done everything I want. Cool. So now I'm going to like talk a little bit more about like what event listeners are doing. We're currently adding this to the document, not very helpful, right? An event listener really takes in 3 things, right? Find the element you want to add the event listener to. Add the event listener. Pass in the type of event as a string as the first argument. And a callback function describing what you want it to do as a second argument. Did I say 3 things? Great. So right here, let's go ahead and do this as a couple step thing. I'm going to make it so that when we click the H1, we console log hello. Anyone tell me how I can do the first step?
You can use the browser, right?
Sure. If I want to, we'll eventually move it to the code, but yeah.
And you can check the element and you can find whatever you want, like the potato, the pizza, and then you can just copy that.
Omar, you're pretty close on yours, right? So we've got the selector here. We've only got an H1 here. And Omar's pretty spot on being like, hey, we should probably pass in that H1 selected by that, right?
Yes.
This is still gonna be null, unfortunately. Because H1 isn't an ID, right? So instead, if we want to get by its ID or by its tag, we want to go ahead and use query selector here. Cool. The ID is specifically for things with IDs on the blob, the DOM. So like this whole section, this UL has an ID called blobs. We can select it with that. Query selector takes in a CSS selector. So it's going to take in just the tag H1. For the same reason, I can go over into our code right here. Oops. Somebody. Oh. Fine. There we go. If I go over here, right? And I do like H1 background color red. What did I do wrong? It's really that. I also put in quotes. Here we go. Notice that I selected it by the fact that it's an H1, right? I want to get the ID of blobs, right? We'd be using a hash symbol. If I want to get the class of blobs or JS blobs, I would be like JS blobs. And this would still work. Cool. So that's what I mean when I say a CSS selector. I just want to be really clear before we start using query selector for literally everything in JavaScript. Cool. So first things first, let's go ahead and let's bring that on home, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say const header equals document query selector H1. Header. Cool. I'm going to paste it right here. Cool. Step 1 done. Let's go ahead and because it's JavaScript, we console log every line of code we add. One cool thing about console log can take in 2 arguments. It can take in as many arguments as you want, and they'll just console log those out in order. So because you're probably going to end up console logging a lot of stuff as you code, this is a really good pattern of being like, I'm going to label my console log and then I'm going to console log it. Cool. I'm going to refresh the page. And of course, header is null. Can anyone tell me why? That's exactly right. Now we are suddenly selecting a query in H1 from the page. We're no longer using just document here. And because of that, our current script, index.js is up here. It runs before any of this gets loaded onto the page. Cool. This doesn't go away. Last time I gave this lecture, I made this mistake accidentally. So that was fortuitous. This time I knew what was going on. But it's a problem that you will never, ever stop having in JavaScript. You will be like, wait, what the? And then you'll be like, right, I didn't defer anything. If I go right here and go say defer, and we're good, right? But we could also, if we want to be like really, if we want to like really talk about how we're doing event listeners here. Remember when I did this last time?
Do you have to say defer in the script, or can you move the script further down the HTML?
You can totally move the script further down the HTML if you prefer to do that. There are 3 different options right here. This one that I'm about to do is the second one, where we don't defer, but instead we use a new event, another event listener called DOM content loaded. That goes ahead and runs this. So we can go ahead, try this out now. You'll notice we still have this H1. Here's a list, nerds. This all runs. I wrote this out last time to show like there's 3 different ways of doing it, to do it with an event listener for DOM content loaded, right? Or to do defer, or to move the script to the bottom. Last time though, you didn't know what an event listener was. Now you do. Look, we're grabbing the element document, which is going to be there. We're adding an event listener to it saying like, hey, wait to make sure the DOM content is loaded. Once that event happens, go ahead and run our app callback function. Does that make sense? Cool. I'm going to not do this because it's a little bit weirder, right? Like I can't call header in here.
Just a question, Nikki.
Yeah. Mhm.
If you do it that way with DOM content loaded, do you have to code everything inside of that then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it's how JavaScript developers have been doing it for years. A lot of people are just like complete serial killers and do this. And then just code their entire app between these 2 brackets. You see this a lot in JavaScript. Yeah. Real thing. JavaScript developers are some of the craziest cowboys, especially if you get to like the ones from like 10 years ago. Just the stuff that they do, insane, right? The one thing that I will warn you, if you use DOM content loaded, right, this is often good. But I've pointed out header now doesn't get defined in console because it's defined inside of this function. It's in the functional scope rather than the main scope. Yeah, anything that has to do with the DOM has been coded entirely by cowboys who are kind of wild. If I then move this out though, right? And I'm now using defer here. Now I can go ahead and call header. Oh, right. Did I not save? Cool. There we go. Does everyone get why when it's outside of DOM content loaded, I can still access header in my console? When it's inside, I can't.
Because it's into another function, it's a different one. It's like
Yeah.
explain.
I don't have access.
Function if it belongs to another function.
Yeah, I don't have access to anything defined inside this function outside of this function. I do, however, have access to things outside of that scope inside that function. There's a weird thing about JavaScript. I'm just going to go ahead and call cheese. JavaScript will look for a variable inside of your function. If it can't find that, it's going to go up a scope. And it's going to keep doing that until it either reaches the main scope and can't find anything, or until it finds something. So this can get a little bit more ridiculous. This might be getting off a little bit off topic right now. Gotta refresh this. Ooh, it actually did get mad at me because something happened here. I'm gonna walk this one back. This is well past what I want to demonstrate. What I'm going to say though is it looks into the local scope. If it can't find something, it goes up a scope. Cool. So here we now have this header. Cool. So this is the first step. I'm now going to go ahead. Depending on how your JavaScript is loaded, yes is the short answer. If you're doing it this way, yes. There's a lot of ways around that. And usually, like, honestly, when you're porting to production, you're probably using some sort of compiler or some sort of crazy thing to minify your JavaScript. But yeah, the way we're doing it right now, me running this code means that anyone on my website can write header right here. That doesn't happen though if I made it inside DOM content loaded. So that's actually another little benefit of DOM content loaded. You are keeping everything scoped. So we've got this, we've selected this element, right? This is the first step, right? Let's go ahead. Eventually, I'm going to have to stop breaking this down to bloop, bloop. So now that we have this element, right? I can do header. Whoa, come on, buddy. Cool. Now that I have it, right? I can add an event listener to it. And this is a pattern I really want you to get down. I want you to be able to have muscle memory, be able to add an event listener to any element on the page. Cool. You select it, you add an event listener, you click, you write the add event listener, and then you pass in your callback function, your argument. So I'm going to go ahead and say click. I'm going to go ahead and say, at this point, I'm going to define this as its own function right here, because I know I'm going to be using it a couple more times. Cool. I pass this in, I define this function separately, but this is the same thing as going over here and doing. Yeah. If I refresh this now, I only get hello on this bad boy. Great. So I selected it, add an event listener, and then had that console log hello. We go the other way, it's going to do the same thing. Boop, 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 boop. Cool. How are you feeling so far? Cool. Now I'm going to show you the next crazy thing about events. So currently this function doesn't take in an argument. I'm going to give this an argument called cheese. And then I'm going to console log cheese. Anyone know what will be console logged when I click the H1? Undefined, that seems like a really good guess, right? To be like, hey, I clearly see that you're not passing in any arguments here. Therefore, there's not going to be any arguments, right? That's the good guess. The metagamers here know that I'm clearly leading up to something. But actually, it's not going to be undefined. It's going to be something super weird that I'm about to tell you about. Go ahead, click this, and I get pointer event. It used to be a mouse event, but since then phones started happening. Cheese is an interesting one. I have this argument. I'm accepting an argument here, right? And then I'm console logging the result of that argument. And I get this weird event, right? I get the angle at which I clicked it. Weirdly, that's new. Azimuth, I think, has to do with arc. If someone knows that. I get where this happened, right? Like on the client, on the window, a bunch of other things. I get whether the control key was being clicked as well. I get a bunch of stuff here. This is crazy, right? Like I just went ahead, added this random argument to this function. And went ahead and now I just have this huge amount of data regarding what was clicked and why. This right here is called the event object, often passed in as E. Some people go ahead and let's just console log E. I'm just gonna do that here. Boop. Right. I think it will actually not get mad at you if you do this. But VS Code will, because it's deprecated. It used to be that you could just write event. It still is. You can just write event and it will automatically know what you're talking about here. I think if you do this here, you might get the same thing too. Don't do this. If you see other people doing it, it's deprecated. They don't like you doing this. But if we take in something that I'm just going to be using, calling E for the rest of the time to refer to an event, right? It will go ahead, add event listener by default, passes in as the first argument to any function you pass in, or to your callback function, an event object that has a lot of information about when the event, what happened in the event. And this becomes phenomenally important for reasons I'm about to show you. Cool? Boop, 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 boop. Cool. There's a lot of stuff here. In JavaScript, a good JavaScript developer knows when to ignore most of this stuff, right? But one hugely useful tool is going to be event.target. It's going to be something you're going to be using constantly over the course of your program here. Going to refresh this. You'll notice it gives me the H1 that I clicked on. This isn't that interesting considering I added it to header, but let's say I went ahead and add this to document, right? Suddenly here, I'm getting the form. Here I'm getting a button for taco. Here I'm getting the H1. Here I'm getting a strawberry LI. Here I'm getting the pizza LI. Here I'm getting a bunch of other things, right? The imaginative of you can see why this is going to be important at some point. It's so useful to finding out, hey, where did this event get fired on? And then to be able to start just referring to it. How are we feeling on event and event.target? There's a bunch of other cool things you can call an event. I'm going to show you prevent default in a bit. But how are we feeling here? Cool. So what would happen if I went ahead and I did oops. Did I just break something? Oops. Something. There we go. What's this gonna do for me?
It's gonna make whatever you click on turn into the taco.
Yeah. Let's go test this out. You're a taco. 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 Not a taco. Not a taco. This is actually going to be very weird. This is going to refresh the page. Not a taco. We'll get into that in a bit. But taco, 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 taco. What happens if I click here? Whole thing becomes a taco. Here, taco. Here, oops, I just deleted the whole page. It's now tacos. Cool. E.target. I'm going to be a little bit more specific here. E.target isn't just the target of the event. It is the most nested target of the event on the tree. That's going to be the next thing I throw out. First off, here I said, hey, give me the target, right? But you'll notice, right? If I click here, this whole thing turns into a taco. If I click here, just this turns into a taco. The event listener is also available here. When I click here, I'm actually also firing off the event listener from here. Oh yeah, even just one time. This whole event is going to be a taco. Eventually, one thing we'll learn, right, is that when I click here, it's going to, when I click on the strawberry, it's first going to check, hey, does the strawberry have any events on it for a click? Then it's going to be like, okay, does its parent have an event? If so, run that. Okay, does its parent have an event? Run that. Does its parent have an event? Run that. That's called event bubbling. And that's the reason why I say when I say event on target, it's the most nested element that the event was fired on. Because eventually, right, you might have one event that a click event that goes on the strawberry directly, and one that goes on the document. You expect both to fire when you click on the strawberry, right? If I say right here, or let's go ahead and let's grab the first strawberries. Document query, selector, li. This is going to give me the first li. Add an event listener. Quick function e e.target .style .background color equals yellow. Cool. You'll notice I now have an event listener on the button on the strawberry directly, right? And on the document, right? And somehow they both work, right? And they both fire directly on this button itself, right? That's because event.target goes to the most nested thing that it got fired on. It's not going to turn the entire document into a taco. It's going to go like, oh, you clicked on this button, therefore the button is event.target, and I'm going to turn that button into taco. How are we feeling?
And what is the tell of what is the last most nested element?
You can go into the DOM tree, right? You can go say, oh, cool. This is the most indented little item right here. You can go check out its parents, the UL, which has a parent, the body, right? Just it's important to remember that this is just a little tree. Cool. Awesome. How are we feeling on this right now? Just the ability to add something, an event listener, and use e.target specifically. One other thing I'm going to do right here. I'm going to console log current target. It's a slightly different thing. You might use it sometimes, you might not. Oops. No. Fine. I'm currently using a Windows keyboard on a Mac computer, so everything's a little bit backwards. But yeah, let's go ahead right here. I'm going to go ahead and say li, right? If I click here, a couple of weird things happen. When I e.current target here is going to give me the li. In the document, in like the document event listener, it's going to give me the document. What for better or for worse, current target returns the object whose event listener callback is currently being invoked. It returns what's on this side. Cool. E.target, most nested thing this happened to. E.current target, what did you add the event listener to in the first place? Cool. All right. This is clearly a lot. Current target, you're not going to have to worry about too much, right? I know a lot of students get by without touching it once. E.target, if you don't know, you should know. Really quickly, I want to break people onto breakout rooms. If you are not available to do a breakout, please do not flee from the lecture right now. You are totally welcome to lurk in a breakout room. Okay, I'm going to be back to teaching in like 10 minutes. We're going to reconvene at 7:10. What I want you all to do, I want you to go to the JavaScript Wikipedia article. Somebody should drive. And I want you to make it so that first step, when you click on any paragraph, or anywhere you want, that element gets turned to have a background color of red. The second thing I would like you to do, if you can get to it, is make it so that whenever you click on something, it turns to Comic Sans. Cool? Comic Sans is a font.
Can you repeat the first set of instructions? I just want to copy that down.
Anything you click changes to a background color of red. Second, turns into Comic Sans. Cool. Go pause recording. From what I can tell, hi, welcome back. From what I can tell, we had some varying degrees of success here, which is good, right? And fine. I also didn't tell you all how to do a lot of this, right? Like, even if you really were at a clutch level, right? Being like, hey, I already did all the event labs, things like that. There was a good chance you might not have finished this because a lot of that was figuring out CSS styling, right? That being said, I want to dig into my process and what I would recommend you do based on, like, first off, students I've seen be most successful at solving this, right? I think, first off, there's a few different problems you have to solve, right? The first is, we have to, let's see if we can add an event to the page, right? Find the event target, right? Change its style, right? This at heart is three different problems, right? And the point where you're going to have the most difficulties if you try to solve all three at once, right? The first thing I would do, right? I would go ahead, I'd be like, hey, let's add an event to the page. Document that add event listener. I'm just gonna like wait for a click event, right? On this whole page, right? And all I'm gonna do is console log. Cool. So notice that we get this right here. It by default passes an E as the first argument, so it invokes console log with E. I'm gonna go one step further. I'm gonna be like, hey, function, let's console log E.target right here. Oops, right. Try it one more time. So now we can see that there's a bunch of different p tags, right? We can click on. Yeah. So the next step, right, would be to figure out how we can make E.target style. My advice, whenever you're coding, right, don't do this inside the event listener for the first time, right? We know how like elements kind of behave, right? So my next step would be to just be like, let p tag equal document dot query selector P. See what we got, P tag. Now let's actually make sure we select this one. Just gonna go copy. Yeah, we get kind of there, right? This is actually a really messy bit of code. I'm just gonna select this one. Oops, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and copy the selector here because I am fancy like that. But right, select something. It doesn't have to be the everything you want, right? But I want to be like, let test tag equal this, right? Now at this point, right? Test tag, we can start doing a bunch of things on, right? We can go ahead and say test tag dot inner text plus equals exclamation point. And now we've got some exclamation points and we broke their links. Cool. We can also go ahead and see test tag dot style. And this is something that a lot of you probably Googled and found, right? The style element that or the style hash that every element has. If you call this, you get a whole object that tells you exactly what you can change in your style. Go ahead, go over here. And you will notice that it has this cool hash inside of it, has this background color, right? This is the one you want to use. If you got to background, that's fair. Omar, I noticed that there's a background right there, right? We can go ahead and we can go and say dot style dot background color equals red. And this will work. Cool. We can now put this together. Now I'm going to go back to my function, right? And here I'm going to say e.target.style.background color equals red. One helpful rule. If you're ever trying to figure out how to do something with styling in JavaScript, right? Background color is hyphenated in CSS. Anything that's hyphenated in CSS is camel cased in JavaScript. This is a very weird thing to be talking about right now. But you'll notice that I did background, capital C color right here equals red. Now we can go ahead. We can test that this works, right? Cool. I'm saying is get the e.target from anything you click here, change the style and change its background color to red. Now, the Comic Sans one was really a test of how well you can Google. Right here, you'll notice you can go ahead, you can grab test tag again. Test tag that style, that font family is a thing that everything has. And here, font family takes a string that represents the fonts, like fonts in order of preference. So font family can take in multiple fonts. And if it finds that your computer has the first one saved, it will use the first one. Otherwise, it will use the second one. Otherwise, it will use the third one. If you're using something that that is a very specific font with a specific name, you have to wrap it in strings. So I have to go ahead and say Comic Sans MS or Comic Sans if you can't find specifically the Microsoft version, or any cursive font that you can find on your computer, or any sans serif font that you can find on your computer would be the way that I would do this. So now, oops, that worked on the test tag. Go ahead and try it out in real life. Great. Now, if I try this out on my whole page, right, we're getting Comic Sans everywhere here. I'm not expecting you to be able to write out font family. That's something I expect you to be able to Google eventually. And when we get to the project, right? What like when we talk to Jordan, when we talk to Megs, right? The two things that they mentioned, like that they do constantly at their job, we're just Google and try to implement, right? And this is when we get to JavaScript, I expect you to kind of near the end with some help be able to incorporate this over like a bit of time to be able to like go ahead and be like, okay, how do I change the styling to do this specific thing? Cool. This is not for a while. We've got 7 weeks to dig into this, right? But definitely get into the habit of being like, how do I do this? And then Googling it and try to incorporate it. Because I can't teach you everything anymore. Like in Ruby, it was kind of easy. There's like very specific things we want to do. Now it's JavaScript, the whole internet's fair game. How are we feeling? This was challenging, right? I think everyone found themselves challenges to a certain point. Get some practice, play around in the console. You don't need to be at your work computer to do this. Cool. So at this point, the last thing I want to dig into before I will let you go is the default action that events sometimes have. And what I mean by that is this, right? We currently can turn anything into a taco, right? Except this smug little form. Anyone want to tell me what just happened? I not only didn't turn into a taco, but it seems to have refreshed the page. Did anyone notice anything change too?
The different order of the emojis, like it's in different place.
Not quite. There's still the
It's
same.
adding it as a
They go like
parameter.
circle.
Yeah, what George said. I know that this animates, right? But interestingly, this right here becomes a new query string parameter, right? If I do like over here, if we watch very carefully, you notice it refreshes the page and passes in the form information as key value pairs. This is something that is unique to submit events on forms. The submit event on a form by default will refresh the page, sending in every single parameter, every single input as a query string parameter into your URL. This is not always helpful, especially remembering that our job at the end of the phase is to build an app that doesn't refresh the page, right? We're building a single page app that uses JavaScript to do all of our refreshing for us. We're not just not refreshing. We're not even going to be like using JavaScript to run like window.reload. We're actually going to just pretend that we're refreshing, but instead just rendering different DOM stuff. Forms have a submit event that, let's go ahead and select this form for it really quickly. Cool. Got the form. Go add an event listener. Submit. And then in here, I'm going to pass an anonymous function that's going to take in E. And what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to call e.prevent default. I'm going to run this function. I'm going to be like, invoke this when this function is done. Or when this function is run. So e.prevent default is a function that I want to run whenever something submits. Let's go see what it does. Now you'll notice we can console log this emoji. The reason it's not turning into a taco, that's fascinating. But it's not refreshing the page anymore. Forms are weird in HTML. They have a I'm gonna stop this very destructive script that turns everything into tacos for us really quickly. I'm instead going to comment this out. Oops. comment this out. I'm going to comment these out. And here, I'm now going to go over here to my form. I'm going to do document.query selector form.add event listener. Click, or submit rather. And here I'm going to pass in function handle submit, takes an E, and calls e.prevent default. What this is going to do for us is now, Batman, this doesn't do anything, right? Cool. This becomes incredibly helpful for obvious reasons, right? The first one, I'm realizing I skipped a step, but the first one, now I don't have to worry about this page refreshing, right? And I can go about doing other things with it. So first off, I do want to create a taco button that adds a new taco to our page. Cool. And really quickly, we do notice that this strawberry still turns yellow when we click it, right? That's an event listener I still have. I'm going to really quickly grab our taco button. It's going to add a taco for us. This way, I'm just going to try to do this in one thing. Function add taco. And here, we can go about figuring out how we would do this here. You'll notice that every single emoji is just an LI with that like forms under ID with an inner text of that emoji. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to try that out. Create element. Nope. Let's do this the easiest way imaginable. And then I'm going to talk for a while about why that's bad next week. Sorry, I'm thinking through like how I want to like spend the last 7 minutes of this like lecture. We really have 2 minutes left, but I want to do 7 more minutes of work. I'm really quickly going to say document.query selector UL to get this whole blob, right? And then here I'm just going to do inner HTML plus equals li and then go ahead right here, taco / li, right? And you'll notice this kind of works, right? This code, I'm just tacking on li to the end, or this li with a taco inside of it to the end of my event, right? Or to the end of my UL, right? So I can go ahead and I can test this out. Taco, whoops, did I actually make this work? Save. Now this button goes ahead and works. Cool. I've mentioned that li is going to have a bunch of drawbacks. First off, I want to change this a little bit, right? I want to do one more thing. I want to go ahead and say add emoji. Ah, gross. Add emoji. Emoji. I'm going to go right here. I'm going to now string interpolate this emoji. And here, I'm going to make this an anonymous function that calls add taco with a taco. And now this code will still work. Oops. Add emoji. I'll refresh this real quick. Hit here. This now goes back to working. So everyone see the abstraction I made really quickly? I went ahead and made this from add taco to something that takes in an argument of emoji and then pass in whatever emoji that is. This will allow me to reuse my add emoji code with something that's not a taco for my form later. So instead here, I'm passing in a function that calls emoji, add emoji with an argument of taco. Crazy, right?
So add emoji, that's in the global scope then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can go ahead right here. I can be like, add emoji. We knew this was going to happen at some point. Yeah. Nothing's stopping me from doing this, right? But we can now go ahead and use this in our form too. One cool thing. One weird thing about the form and the submit event, right? Let's go ahead. What a poop. Weirdly, the submit event for a form, or the submit event fires on the entire form. It doesn't fire on the button. That's a very common misconception. That's going to be something that's you're going to code out in weird ways a bunch of times. There's also a bunch of things forms can do. So I'm going to go ahead and select this form outside of it. Cool. And you'll notice, right? There's actually, I can go ahead, if I expand these, you'll notice my input has a name of emoji, right? One very silly thing, I think a lot of people I review do, they'll do like this, right? Dot value, and then get poop, right? It's one thing to do, right? Why would I caution people about using array methods here? Does anyone have any idea? Or like you invoking something by its index?
Because it doesn't necessarily have to be in that order.
Yeah, it doesn't. Eventually, like I might have to change my form a little bit and I don't have to recode everything, right? I go ahead. It's actually going to allow me to call it by its name using either square bracket notation or dot notation if it's a single word. And that'll bring me to the input. Sorry, I skipped ahead a few steps because this is the end of lecture and I'm rushing something that shouldn't be rushed. From the form, right? The input fields, right? Any input field, you can get its value. So let's go ahead and let's grab that input. You notice I have this input field, right? Here, if I want to find out what's inside of it, I can type dot value on it. And it will go ahead and say there's a poop emoji in there. Cool. If I want to access it from the form, I can use the name of the input field to call that on the form. I can go ahead and say dot emoji if it's one word. Or I can go ahead and use square brackets emoji if it's multiple. And then I can go ahead and call value there. Here, it becomes e.target.emoji.value, right? Because e.target is going to be the form. Yeah? Really flying through this right now. This is cruel to do to you. How are we feeling right now? Okay. Like, I'll get it in the recording, but try to get it together. That's the vibe that I think I'd read, right? So now if I go here, go try this again. And you'll notice we're console logging this poop emoji, right? There's other things we can do to a form. In addition to being able to call its inputs, we can also call something called reset, right? If we want to, and that'll clear the form for us. But I'm going to go ahead and now use this. I'm going to say add emoji. whatever we just did here. Let's actually go back. Whoops. Add emoji event dot target dot value. Let's go ahead. Loop. Right here. Poop, taco, poop, taco, poop, 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 taco, right? So I'm doing right here is I'm pasting this new LI with this emoji that I'm calling from the form into my inner HTML for UL. The emoji shortcut is Control Command Space on the Mac. I think it's Windows period or Windows semicolon on a Windows. But here's the stinger, and here's why I have another lecture after this. You remember how when we click the strawberry, it should have a background color change to yellow, right? This no longer happens. So refresh the page, this works, right? But as soon as I add a taco, this event listener goes away. The reason for this is because I just changed the entire inner HTML of the UL. And the LI right here was part of that UL, right? If I click on it, right, we end up with an LI with a style that has a background color of yellow. That's hard coded in there now. So now if I add a taco, that stays, right? But whenever we actually add something by using plus equals inner HTML, we're actually asking it to reload the entirety of this inner HTML, basically making a new copy and re-rendering it. So we lose all of the JavaScript that gets attached to it. This is the reason why I have another lecture on Thursday. And I know this is getting a little bit annoyingly Marvel Cinematic Universe, where I like always end the lecture with a stinger to show what the next lecture's thread is. But we're going to be like, the next weird thing I'm going to show you is why we've got to design this in specific ways so that we don't end up deleting our own event listeners. And how to make it so that we end up like having a really non-buggy app when we get through to have a bunch of event listeners at the same time. So for now, what I want you all to practice, adding event listeners to items, right? To objects, add a bunch of different event listeners, play around, try to just play on your computer, be like, hey, I want to add event listener to when I click something, this changes. When I scroll over something, this happens. And try to make use of e.target. Eventually, we're going to be playing around a lot with forms. I'm going to review everything I discussed in forms in the last 5 minutes here, right? But for now, I think that's all I want to discuss today. I will stick around for questions for the next 5 minutes, but I've already kept you over 8 minutes. Thank you so much, everyone. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mickey.
Mhm.